So here's the thing about catnip and Mordred is that he tried it a couple of times. He's not a fan. He doesn't really care for it. He he'll give it a little sniff and then he kind of like walks away from it. And I don't know why that is. Maybe he's just not a fan of getting high. Hey Timberly, hi Betsy, good to see ya. We'll get started in just a couple minutes because I do like to give everybody a chance to settle in before we get going. I think he's realized that if he sits in my lap down here, that he's not actually on camera. And he can get all of his cuddles and snuggles and pets and not have to be on camera. Hey! I believe that is Adam modding tonight, and I'll explain why we have a moderator in just a minute. Hey Kim. Good to see ya. Hell yeah. Adam says that the troll flogger is waiting. Hi, Karen. Good to see ya. All right, so we are in that 7 o'clock hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome everyone to effing Chicago. My name is Mandy Crypt. This is Mordred Crypt, and we are a collective of tour guides behaving badly. This means that you're going to get all the awesome and amazing content you get from any other content creator, except I am going to swear and talk about whatever the fuck I want. And today we are going to do part 2 of my talk about Ted Bundy. But before we get started, I have two housekeeping things to talk about today. First and foremost, if you guys have been watching our page today, you might have noticed that and I will take credit for this one, I posted a picture that was somewhat controversial. And I didn't realize that we still had Trump supporters in our ranks, but apparently we did. Either that or, they happened to stumble across our public page and got all butthurt about me not loving the direction that this country's going. Anyway, in case you were wondering, effing Chicago is a collective of tour guides behaving badly. We are also a collective of bleeding heart socialists. We are not here for your fascism. We are not here for your hate. We are not here for intolerance, except to be intolerant towards the intolerant. So, if you are here for any, Trump supporting, any Elon Musk supporting, you can go get fucked. And all of us feel that way. And I'm perfectly happy to say it on camera. Now, besides that, one more little piece of housekeeping. I want to give a quick shout out to all of my Crypt Keepers on Patreon. Betsy, Kath, Courtney, Donna, Eleanor, Gail, Jean, Joanne, Kathleen, Katie, Libby, Luann, Lucian, Megan, Mona, Pat, and Tom. Thank you all so much for your continued support, because literally I could not do this shit without you guys. Every single one of my supporters on Patreon, you all make it possible for me to be able to do these free talks, and I appreciate you all so much. And especially my Crypt Keepers, because y'all buy me a coffee every month, which is great. If you were ever wondering what we do on Patreon, every month I will post a exclusive video on Patreon on a topic that we all kind of pick. Excuse me. I also do weekly posts about cemetery posts. I do weekly posts on different types of history. I do all kinds of fun stuff, and I share all of my notes. So if you're looking to do something fun with your paycheck, you can give a little bit of it to me. Buy me a coffee, buy me a stick of gum. Either way, it helps me out quite a bit. And without further ado, let's get into it. So, When we last left Ted Bundy, Ted had raped and brutalized 19 women, killing 17 that we know of. Their names are Karen Sparks, who survived, Linda Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgianne Hawkins, Janice Ott, Denise Naslund, Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Smith, Laura Amy, Carol Duranch, survived, Deborah Kent, Karen Campbell, Julie Cunningham, Denise Oliverson, Lynette Culver, and Susan Curtis. He had been arrested by the Utah State Patrol officer Bob Hayward in Granger, Utah, for driving suspiciously late at night and also failing to stop when requested. And when he finally did stop after a high-speed chase, they found all of this shit in his car. What they found, amongst other concerning items, was a ski mask, a mask made out of a nylon stocking, a crowbar, a set of rope, handcuffs, trash bags, an ice pick. And basically this is a rape, abduction, and murder kit right over here. A further search of his home also revealed other concerning items, but nothing that was immediately illegal or actionable. What they did miss, however, was a stack of incriminating Polaroids that would have confirmed for them that he was in fact a murderer. He had hidden those quite well. They missed them in that first search, and he ended up destroying them after he was allowed to go back home. So we truly have no idea the scope of his attacks, because it was pretty obvious that he murdered many women and very likely killed more than he admitted to. They put him under 24-hour surveillance, and when he eventually tried to get rid of his car, because he was, not wanting to hang on to this giant rolling piece of evidence, they seized it and searched it, and they would find hair that matched Karen Campbell, Melissa Smith, and Carol Duranch. And the investigator had said that the possibility that all three of these women had shared space willingly in this car at one time was minuscule, impossible. So, on October 2nd, 1975, Ted was put into a lineup, and Carol Duranch quickly ID'd him, even though he had changed his appearance. He had cut his hair, cut his beard, did everything he possibly could to obscure his identity from her, and she still managed to pick him out of a lineup. Now, despite this, he was let out on bail, a $15,000 bail, and they would go on to prepare for trial. Ted would spend most of that time before trial in Seattle living with his girlfriend, Liz Clover. And Washington police also put him under surveillance 24/7, even though they couldn't actually connect him definitively at the time to the Pacific Northwest murders that he would absolutely admit to committing later on. He was a very strong suspect for these cases. And actually, November 1975, Jerry Thompson from Utah, Robert Keppel from Washington, Michael Fisher from Colorado, and 30 other detectives on the various cases across these states would get together in Aspen, Colorado to discuss Ted Bundy and how to link him to these cases. This was the first type of multi-state conference for one crime that had ever been put together. That is how, massive his impact was. He actually, spawned the creation of a brand new type of conference. February 1976, the trial for the kidnapping and attempted assault of Carol Duranch begins. This is the first case chosen in the pile of things that they were able to actually connect him to, because the evidence in this case was the strongest and they had a living witness. And it was a very highly publicized trial. Ted wanted to be very involved in his own defense. If you remember from the last video, he had actually been a law student for quite some time, and he was very interested in the law. He thought he knew better, and he thought he could, really be an advocate and an asset in his own defense. His lawyer at the time, John O'Connor, said that he had reveled in the chance to defend himself publicly. He loved all the public attention, was always in front of a camera as much as he could, and he would agree with his lawyer's advice on foregoing a jury trial. They had a bench trial instead. But aside from that, he really didn't, he didn't really take too much of the advice. Now, the trial would last 4 days. And after a weekend of, oh, sorry, before I get to that point, the defense kept Carol on the stand for hours. She was really the prosecution's main witness and was able to recount her tale for hours on end. Literally, they kept her up on that stand all day long, trying to trip her up and trying to get her to, wibble wobble in her testimony, but she never did. She was nervous because this was the first time she'd ever done such a thing, and hopefully she never had to again. But she was very confident in keeping her story straight. So she was a very strong witness, and the trial would last 4 days. After a weekend of deliberation, the Judge Stuart Hansen Jr., found Ted Bundy guilty of kidnapping and assault. He was 29 when convicted, and he was sentenced to a 1 to 15 year span and sent to Utah State Prison. So he wasn't given like a definitive amount of time. He was given a very flexible amount of time. He had many people who still didn't believe that he was capable of such a thing, including his mother and several of his girlfriends. Now, while in prison, he would be evaluated by psych professionals, and a lot of them concluded that he had a very high propensity for violence and that he would likely reoffend. And we will see that that holds true in a little bit. So October 1976, Ted is found in the prison yard with an escape kit that included maps and airline schedules and a social security card that did not belong to him. For this attempted escape, he would spend several weeks in solitary, but he really used that time to try and plan a different escape. He was really thinking about it. He was not one to just kind of sit and let things happen to him. Also, October 21st, 1976, Colorado authorities charged Ted with the murder of Karen Campbell. See, they were going to go through all the cases that they connect him to one by one as they built up evidence for the other cases. So he was represented in this particular one by attorney Bruce Lubeck. The prosecution had some very damning evidence, such as gas receipts that showed he was in the area, ski resort manuals with like additions and earmarked pages for where Karen Campbell was staying, and the hairs found inside his car. He was extradited to Colorado to stand trial in January of 1977 and charged with first-degree premeditated murder. And during this time, he had not adjusted to prison well. He was not interested in staying here very long. He also felt like his previous representation, I guess, didn't do the job right. So he insisted on actually representing himself. So Bruce Lubeck actually was more of a legal advisor while he took on the actual defense role. He spent much of his time in the legal archives and the legal library because as a person who was representing himself, he was given all of the opportunity to prepare and to look at all of the resources to try and make a good case for himself. He constantly was pacing in his cell, and he also would often jump from the top bunk in his cell to the floor. And he said he did this for exercise because he felt like he didn't get enough. The few minutes walk from the actual jail cell to where the legal library was, he said wasn't long enough, and it's the only sun he got because they wouldn't let him out since he had already attempted escape. So he was using these as exercise. And people didn't really seem to think too hard about it. They just kind of went, yeah, I guess. Where are you going to go in the cell, right? And also, when he's not being watched, he is practicing taking his clothes off, changing his clothes, and right before his court appearance, he had gotten a haircut and a shave, which also changed his appearance a little bit. In June 1977, Ted is transferred from the Garfield County Jail to Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for his preliminary hearing. Now, Ted decides that because it's a day with good weather, it's time to put his escape plan into action. This day was going pretty well for his case, actually, shockingly. So they felt like the Karen Campbell case didn't have as strong evidence as the Carol DeRange case, and it could have gone either way at this point, but they were pretty confident that they would win their case. So his lawyers were trying to remain optimistic, they were trying to be comforting, and Ted, while representing himself, was able to not only have a legal advisor, but he was also able to use the courthouse's library to prepare for his various arguments during the preliminary hearing and subsequent hearings. During a recess, he was allowed to go into the library with a guard to prepare. Now, obscured by a bookshelf, he was able to actually open a window, which shockingly didn't have bars on the outside and didn't have any kind of like permanent screen or anything blocking the people from inside to getting outside. So he was able to open up that window and jump from the second story window down to the ground outside of the courthouse. When he landed, he severely sprained his ankle, but despite that, he took off running. And somebody spotted him jumping from the second story window into the bushes. And very quickly, people knew what had happened. This was not a like, oh, we don't know where he went. They knew that he was running off into the forest. They knew he was trying to escape, and they knew within seconds of him getting out of the building, but they were not fast enough. There was not enough people outside to catch him. So he not only fled the building, but he was able to shed a layer of clothing, changing the outfit that he was wearing along with this new haircut and shave, and he ran into the Aspen Mountains. Within minutes of this happening, the cops were able to put up a roadblock in the two main roads that came in and out of Aspen. And every single car that was leaving Aspen was thoroughly searched. They also used this as an opportunity to collect pot for some reason. But, they were searching cars thinking that he might have stolen a vehicle or coerced somebody into giving him a lift out of town. But that they didn't stop there. Just in case they missed him on the roads, they were going to look for him in the forest. So they went out into the forested mountains of Aspen, and they went with ATVs, horses, and even tracker dogs to try and find him. They would lose his scent with the tracker dogs at the river, and they searched around like the immediate area. But he moved fast for a guy with a fucked up ankle. Later that day, he was able to find and break into a hunting cabin where he was able to steal food, clothing, and a hunting rifle. And he would spend his first night there. June 8th, the next day, Ted left his cabin and headed south through the forest towards Crested Butte. This is a small town not too far away from Aspen. Unfortunately for him, he gets lost in the woods and he wanders aimlessly for 2 days. During this time, it had rained, and that meant the temperature came down a little bit. He was not well equipped for this. He didn't have any kind of survival gear. And while he wasn't a terrible outdoorsman, he was certainly no Bear Grylls or Survivor Man. He would eventually get really, really weak and really cold and wet. June 10th, he breaks into a camping trailer on Maroon Lake, which is 10 miles south of Aspen, and he stole food and a ski parka, so he was able to warm up a little bit. And then he decided he was going to turn back towards Aspen because he felt like he was probably going to have a better chance, at this point, a few days out, stealing a car and getting out of Dodge. And what's funny is he was even able to evade roadblocks on his way back into Aspen, and search parties that were still running around in the mountains for him. On June 13th, at a golf course which was on the edge of Aspen, he broke into and stole a car, and by this point he's in rough shape. He has not had a ton of food, he has had very little sleep, his ankle is jacked up, and he's not doing well. So he is not driving very well either. He is spotted by 2 patrol officers who spot him driving erratically, and he's immediately arrested. In total, he had been on the run for 6 days. When he was arrested, he was shoeless, had blisters on his feet, a severely sprained ankle, was dirty, sleep deprived, and just in 6 days he had lost 25 pounds. This was not a nice, happy jaunt through the woods. This was a very ill-planned and ill-timed escape attempt. Although they would determine that it was planned later. Mostly because they had found materials that he was studying to try and get him around the mountains. He would later joke with his psychologist about how he found it funny that the guards who were now in charge of watching him were jumpy because he had managed to escape, and they were concerned he would try again. His lawyers also highly advised that he stop trying to escape and he just be a good boy, sit in your cell, ride out your sentence. He became much more defiant, though, when he was told to sit down and shut up. His lawyer said that he became just incredibly indignant. He had said that a more rational defendant might have realized that he stood a good chance of acquittal and that beating a murder charge in Colorado would probably have dissuaded prosecutors from doing other cases, is the unsaid part there. And with as little as a year and a half left on his Carol Duranche conviction, had Ted persevered, he could have been a free man. So basically, because he didn't have, like, there wasn't a ton of evidence against him in the other cases, had he just dealt with his sentence, it's likely he would have gotten out much earlier than 15 years. He could have just, he waited it out, and he chose not to. And immediately upon going back into prison, he starts on another escape plan. He manages to get a very detailed floor plan of the Garfield jailhouse and a hacksaw. And before you ask how did he get that, he traded it amongst other prisoners who had access to other tools. He learned that a prison guard, the chief jailer, lived in an apartment above his cell, which is very convenient for him. And he was able to also, over the course of 6 months, smuggle in $500 in cash. People like Carol Boone, who it becomes much more important later on, and who he was still in a relationship with, even as he's still in a relationship with Liz Klopfer and another woman. I'm not going to say her name. She was very much a footnote in this one, but he is maintaining several relationships from behind bars. I mean, you gotta admire the determination here. But yeah, so he's able to smuggle in $500 cash, and he's making more preparations. In the evenings, while he's being left to his own devices, he's able to cut a 1 square foot hole in the ceiling. And I'll make this a little bit bigger so that way you can see it better, but I mean, this was his cell. And that little square at the top of the picture there, that's the hole that he managed to cut without anybody noticing it, without anybody hearing him. Not only did he cut this very small hole up there, he also purposely starved himself so he would lose a total of 35 pounds so he could wriggle up through that ceiling hole and rummage around through the ceiling crawl space between the floors. And he did that a lot. He did that over the course of several weeks, and he was not exactly subtle about it. Like, other prisoners heard him rooting around up there, and they told the officers that were on duty, like, they told the guards, hey, there's somebody up there, and they didn't bother to check, and they didn't give them any acknowledgement that there was somebody up in the ceiling. Which obviously is to their embarrassment later. Now, meanwhile, while all of this is going on, the Karen Campbell trial is rescheduled and redirected to be held in Colorado Springs. On December 30th, 1977, Ted puts his new escape plan into action. He does this because this is New Year's Eve, and he knows that they are on a skeleton crew. A lot of people are home for the holidays with their families. Some of them are traveling, and the guards had actually let some people let some people out of prison early, and some of the prisoners were also furloughed. The non-violent ones, the ones who had, just a little bit left on their sentence, a lot of those guys were sent home to enjoy the holiday with their families. If you have not seen things like Orange is the New Black, furlough is something you can achieve if you're in prison, if you talk to the right people. So he waits for his dinner to arrive, and that guard who brings him his dinner, that's the last person to see him in prison. He waits until it's a little bit quiet, and he shimmies up through the ceiling into the crawl space, and he makes his way into the apartment of the chief jailer. Now, you can see this both ways, lucky or unluckily. In one way, it's lucky because the jailer and his wife weren't home. Who knows what would have happened had Ted been desperate enough to hurt or kill people who were in his way, preventing his escape. Unlucky is, the jailer might have had a good shot at keeping this guy in prison, catching him in his apartment, right where there's cells. So it could go either way. You can decide if it's lucky or not. Up to you. Now, when this happens, he is not noticed missing right away because we're on a skeleton crew. There's not a lot of people, walking the rounds here. He's able to steal clothes from the jailer's own closet, and he just walks out the front door. Nobody stops him. Nobody thinks twice. He's just able to walk out and leave. He immediately steals a car and heads for Glenwood Springs, and then he hitchhikes to Vail. From Vail, he takes a bus to Denver, Colorado. From Denver, he catches an early flight to Chicago. By the time anyone notices he's missing, he has landed in Chicago. So he is now gone for several hours, and he's half a country away. When the news of this successful second escape attempt happens, people are outraged and terrified because this is a very dangerous man who's now loose on the streets and nobody knows where he is. And on top of that, he did it right under the guards' noses. Nobody noticed he was missing until it was far too late. A lot of people knew in their gut that he was going to reoffend, that he was going to be a danger to other women, and that, with him on the run, anything could be happening. Everyone knew Ted, everyone who knew Ted, everybody who was close to him, girlfriends, family, they were all notified of his escape and strongly advised that if he reached out to contact authorities so that we could rearrest him and put him back in prison. Now, from Chicago, because he's not done running yet, from Chicago, Ted takes an Amtrak up to Ann Arbor, Michigan. And he stays there for a few days. On January 2nd, he was spotted in a tavern. He was watching the Rose Bowl that night, apparently. But he is not recognized as Ted Bundy until well after he leaves Michigan. January 5th, he gets a federal warrant issued for him. He is now one of the top people wanted by the FBI. And he also knew that this was going to happen because he had taken law courses and psychology courses, and he's now been involved in the legal system for a little bit. He kind of has an idea of what these guys are looking for. He knew that the FBI would looking for a specific routine, specific habits, and he was determined to make an entire new identity and stay under the radar. He was not really planning on doing any big crimes that would get him noticed. He knew that different departments also were going to be slow to communicate because we have no internet at this point, and long distance calls are slow, they're expensive. Most departments aren't going to waste money on it, right? So they are having to communicate through faxes and snail mail. And so he's confident he can stay, 2-3 steps ahead of the game, and honestly, for a while, he's able to. January 7th, Ted steals a car and drives to Atlanta, Georgia. And then January 8th, from Atlanta, he boards a bus to Tallahassee, Florida. And he spends the night in Tallahassee in a boarding house under the name Chris Hagen. And that boarding house was just 4 blocks away from Florida State University. Now, he would later say he chose Tallahassee, Florida specifically, because it was on the complete opposite end of the country from where people knew about him and about his crimes. This was not something that really, the everyday person was going to be, watching the newspapers and searching for information about him. While this was a very publicized case, for him in Colorado, he was able to bypass a lot of shit. He was able to hide in plain sight in Florida. He would say that he had every intention of getting a job, building a normal life, and staying out of trouble and out of crime. And he knew if that happened, if he was able to maintain that lifestyle, it would have been impossible for police to find him. But when he went to apply for a job on a construction site, he was surprised that they asked him for a government-issued ID, a state ID, and he didn't have that. He had no driver's license, no ID, no social security card. So he was kind of shit out of luck. And he realized, well, fuck, if I don't have any of those documents, I can't get a real job. So he resorted to his old, standbys of shoplifting and stealing. And that's how he supported himself, with stolen cash and stolen credit cards. He said that he would walk through grocery stores and he would pick out wallets out of purses at the grocery store, which is just super shitty of him to do that. The balls that this man had. So he not only is unable to stay away from crime, he is unable to stay away from women, and this becomes a huge fucking problem because he is not done hurting women. The Chi Omega sorority house at this point is getting back into their post-holiday routine. A lot of the girls have come home because they have classes and exams that are getting scheduled. The girls are kind of settling back in, getting ready for the final semester of the year. On January 15th, most of the girls were home. There were a few girls who were out partying. There was a few girls out on dates. But by midnight on January 15th, most of the girls are home. And they are settling in for bed because they all have classes the next day. And at least one of them had an exam. Sometime around 2:45 a.m., Ted Bundy sneaks into this sorority house and he begins a horrific assault on 4 of the sorority girls, ultimately killing 2 of them. So, here's our victims. The first one, sadly, is Margaret Elizabeth Bowman. She was attacked first. She was born January 6, 1957 in Honolulu, Hawaii, and she was born into a very religious military family. Because her father was in the military, her family traveled quite a bit, and so she got to see a lot of the country. But eventually, after her father retired, the family settled in Florida, St. Petersburg specifically. She was known to be very bold, intelligent, determined, and I thought this was really interesting. I read an obituary that said she always insisted on being called Margaret. Not Maggie, not Peg, Margaret. She was very insistent on that. She was an avid reader, very active and social student, with a very wide range of hobbies that included speaking French and scuba diving. She followed her grandma's legacy to Florida State University, where she joined her grandmother's sorority house, Chi Omega, and she was studying art history and classical civilizations. So, January 15th, when he breaks into this house, he bludgeons her with a chunk of wood while she's sleeping and then strangling her and molesting her body while she's dying and after she's died. She dies in bed of her injuries at 21 years old. She never woke up from this attack. Now, from here, because he's not done, I mentioned I have 4 people, he goes into the adjoining room of Lisa Levy. Lisa Levy, I couldn't find too much about her. It seems like her family was extremely private, and that's 100% understandable. You don't want your loved ones getting, picked apart by random people. So what I do know is she was born February 1st, 1957 into a Jewish family, and she had just gotten her braces taken off shortly before this happened. She had braces on until she was until about 3 weeks before her death. And I think that's just, it's tragic. Remember we talked all the way, the last talk about Susan Curtis, who had just gotten her braces put on at age 15? This girl just got them taken off. And she was just a couple weeks away from turning 21 when Ted Bundy walked into her room, bludgeoned her with the same piece of wood, bit her buttocks so hard that it dug into the flesh, and sexually assaulted her with a hairspray bottle. He also, his attack was so vicious, his bludgeoning and his tearing into her body was so vicious, one of her nipples was nearly torn off. Now, she had initially survived this attack, but she would die in an ambulance on the way to the hospital not too long afterwards. She died shortly after her friend, one of her best friends who had grown up with her, was pulled off of her body trying to give her comfort in her final moments. He's still not done. Ted moves into the room shared by Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. Kathy would be attacked first in this room. And Kathy remembers a little of what happened. Because he was so frantic at this point, he kicked open the door and it slammed into the wall. She remembers being startled awake and seeing a shadowy figure in her blurry eyes because she doesn't have her glasses on, and then immediately feeling pain because she is bludgeoned in the face with the same hunk of wood that 2 of her friends had been hit with. And then immediately after that, Karen also is bludgeoned. Now, Kathy, she comes from a very protective family. Her family were actually very afraid of letting her go to college on her own. She had been very sheltered, and she was experiencing freedom for the first time. She's 21 years old, and she's enjoying, her life, being an adult and being away from home and kind of starting her own life. And this happens to her right after she comes home from a wedding, spending time with friends and family. When he hits her, it shatters her jaw so badly that one of the hinges of her jaw breaks off, and it's literally being held on by like a muscle and a flap of skin. She had to clutch her jaw closed so that way it wouldn't like tear off. He also fractured her skull, and because of the bludgeoning, her tongue was severely lacerated. And she would be conscious this entire time. She never went unconscious, which is just horrific. She honestly, she would talk about her experiences later. There's interviews that you can watch with her, but hearing her talk about how this went down is just, it's frightening what she went through. Karen, her roommate, right across the room from her, another 21-year-old Florida State University student. She was back home from the holidays. She was the last one attacked. Now, she's also done interviews and talked a little bit about her experience. He beat her in the face, causing a concussion, a fractured jaw, the loss of several teeth, and because she had woken up enough to try and fight back, he had crushed the fingers on her hand, that these defensive wounds, trying to get this man off of her. Both of these women survived, and I forgot to put a picture in here. Both of these women survived their attacks, and they credit their sister, their sorority sister, Nita Neary, because she had just come home at that point from a date, and she was driving her car into her parking spot, and the headlights, the light from her car, had shined in the room, and it spooked him. So he took off running at that point, and actually Nita said that she had seen him come down the stairs and out the door. So she actually would go on to testify against him later on. That she was able to call the police, call the ambulances. Within seconds of him running out, all of the sorority sisters woke up. A lot of them felt terrible that they didn't hear anything, that they couldn't stop this. A lot of them had survivor's guilt after this. But the good news is that these two women, Kathy and Karen, because they survived, they went on to live very full lives. Both of them, I mean, they lived very different lives after this point, but they lived very full lives. And they were both, they said that they were very happy that they were able to have the gift of life that their two other sisters didn't. And like I said, both of them have gone on to do interviews. You can find videos of them online. It's interesting to hear their talk. But he's still not done, because right after this, he goes to a different woman's home. He goes to another Florida State University student's house, Cheryl Thomas. And this is just 6 blocks away from where the Omega house is. And it is actually very probable that he stalked her before he attacked her. She would say that she had noticed a couple of times a guy who kind of looked like him, like off in the distance watching her. And he would later say that he had actually shown up to the house earlier that evening, but noticed a guy in the driveway fixing her car. And because there was another man there, he got intimidated and he didn't stick around to try and do what he wanted to do. He was pissed, and he took that out on the sorority girls at the Chi Omega house. So now that she's alone and she's sleeping in her bed, it's, after 3 a.m., he breaks into her house, bludgeons her, but she's able to scream. She's able to make noise. And she lives in this duplex apartment. Her neighbors hear her, and she screams so loud that they call her apartment. And when she doesn't pick up, they immediately call the police. So he knows after that phone rings that, someone is coming for him. He knows the jig is up. So after he beats her near to death, he takes off running, and he actually leaves a stalking mask behind that they will later use as evidence. This attack is brutal. She has a shattered jaw, a fractured skull, and she is left with permanent hearing loss and equilibrium issues, but she survives. And she does not let him take her down in any way. She was a dancing student, and it took her a really long time to get back to a point where she could dance, but she did it. She also did interviews, and you can find those online as well. Now, after this, people around Florida State University are horrified, and the cops have no suspects. There's nobody who knows who did this, and they don't know if this is going to happen again on the campus. So a lot of students left. A lot of women in particular left the college because they were afraid that they were not safe there anymore. There were girls who left the Chi Omega house, like they maybe didn't leave the university, but they left the house. And also, as I mentioned, there were girls here who lived on either side of the girls attacked and across the hall, and they were so upset that they didn't hear anything that, like, it was very hard for them to live with themselves. And actually, Kathy would later say that none of them called her. None of them talked to her after this. She only went to the house to get her stuff after they had wired her jaw shut, and nobody looked her in the eye. Nobody called her afterwards, and she felt very alone and isolated. Karen, on the other hand, she was like, fuck it, he's not going to ruin my life. So she went back to the Chi Omega house and she graduated. So very different experiences here. It was very interesting to listen to. Now, also, another thing that happens on the campus is that the frat boys of the campus, they actually sign up to take shifts escorting girls around the university. A lot of them are offering to, like, sleep in the lobbies of these sorority houses so the girls feel safe. And there was a huge uptick in buying of home security measures, guns, dogs, locks, all kinds of stuff to try and make people feel like they were more in control and safe. And Ted gets away again because nobody knows that it's Ted who's done this. He steals a Florida State University van and he drives to Jacksonville, Florida. And he tries very soon after this to get somebody else. He approaches a girl named Leslie Parmenter. She's 14 years old. He identifies himself as Richard Burton of the fire department. Her father, by the way, Leslie's father, is chief of police, so it's very likely she knew a fair amount of firemen because a lot of times these guys work together. So he's trying to lure this teenager into his car, but he runs off because he is scared and confronted by her older brother. This is the second to last time that we really see him trying. I don't think he had actually waited this long between victims, but that's just me. From Jacksonville, he drives down to Lake City, Florida, searching for a new victim. And while he's there, he checks in for one night at a Holiday Inn with stolen credit cards. The next day, February 9th, he abducts, rapes, and kills his last known victim, Kimberly Leach. Kimberly was born October 28, 1965 in Lake City, Florida to Thomas and Frida Leach. She had a brother named Michael, and sadly, her entire immediate family is now deceased. All of them are buried together in the same cemetery, though. She was described as a good, obedient, but shy girl, but she also was quick to warm up and make friends with anyone. Her friends remember her being a very loving light who always wanted to brighten your day. And she was just 12 years old when he got her. She came to Lake City Junior High School like she did every day. She attended her homeroom as normal, and from homeroom, her class went to PE, but it was raining that day. So her teacher had them sitting in the school's auditorium watching movies. She, however, had left her purse in homeroom. So her homeroom teacher sent another student who was, like, walking between classes to go and fetch her, to tell her to come and get her purse. She did. She left class, got her purse, and she was on her way back to PE when she was intercepted by Ted Bundy. And no one saw her after that. She was just walking between buildings when he snatched her up by the arm and dragged her to his van. Later, a witness, a crossing guard, had actually seen this. He didn't know who this man is, didn't know who she was, but he had seen this interaction of him, dragging her from the school to his van, and he assumed that this girl had gotten in trouble and her dad was picking her up and taking her home. He didn't even think that there was a possibility that this man was abducting a girl in plain sight in broad daylight. Nobody would think that, right? We always think about, like, the creeper in the shadows. We don't think about somebody operating, in the middle of the day like this. It was discovered later that this was Ted abducting her. Now, for her to skip school it was unheard of. She always went to her classes. What's wild is she was not noticed, like, really noticed missing. until her parents came to pick her up at 2:30 that afternoon when school was let out. It was at that point that the school told them, "Your daughter skipped class." And they're like, "There's no way that she skipped class. Like, what are you talking about?" So she was immediately reported missing, but this was too late. It was too late within a couple of hours of him abducting her. Once she had been put in his van, he drove her to a remote location in Swanee River State Park, and he would sexually assault her before slitting her throat and mutilating her body, ultimately leaving her in a tin pig shed covered in litter and debris. This is 35 miles away from home. So she literally was dead within a couple of hours of him taking her from her school. But she would not be found for 8 weeks, which is tragic that this little girl was gone within hours. It kills me. February 12th, he was now really short on money, and some of the police were kind of onto him. He felt like the police were catching up to him. So he stole another car, and he was heading for the Florida Panhandle. On February 15th at 1 p.m., Ted is stopped by a Pensacola police officer named David Lee near the Alabama state line. Officer Lee runs a warrants and wants check on him in the vehicle, and he finds out that the VW Bug that he is driving is stolen. So he tries to arrest him right away for car theft, and Ted kicks his legs out from under him and took off running. And he responds to this, the cop responds to this by shooting his service pistol twice in the air as a warning. When that doesn't stop him, he tackles him to the ground. And Ted tries to take his service weapon, but luckily he was able to be subdued and put in handcuffs before that happens. Officer Lee was able to fully subdue him, but he is refusing to give any information about himself. When they search the car that he's driving in, they find 3 sets of Florida State University IDs, all belonging to women, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen TV for a house that he does not have. When being taken to the station, Ted allegedly told the officer, "I wish you had killed me," because he had no idea who he had picked up. Now, he gives a stolen identification, and the real guy whose ID this is, he calls the station and he's like, "Hey, bro, that ain't me. Like, that's not me that you've arrested." So they're like, "Well, who the hell are you then?" He continues to refuse to give his name. And his court-appointed lawyer is like, "Psh, he just stole a car. He's not, a threat to the public." But the judge is smart here. He's like, "If you will not give your name, I'm not going to give you bail. So you can sit your ass in jail until you tell us who you are." Now, he holds off, giving his name as long as he can. And actually, some of the papers had taken his picture and posted his picture in the papers saying that he's Mr. Mystery. "Do you know this man?" He was interrogated, and he was rude, uncooperative, snotty. But eventually he realizes that he can't keep this up forever. They're going to find out who he is. So he says that he will give his identification in exchange for a phone call to his girlfriend, Liz. The conversation was basically him calling her to warn her that, there's a storm coming, honey, and there's going to be some real bad news. You're going to see some stuff you don't like. Prepare for it. He also wished that they could have had a nice sit-down conversation to talk about, what was wrong with him. Like, why am I so fucked up? Try to, parse it out together. And when she goes, "Are you really sick?" He got really defensive and told her to back off. So only he's allowed to say he's sick. No one else can. Now, a second phone call a little bit later, he's very contrite to Liz. He apologizes, and he, gets all boo-hooey because he knows he's never going to see, life outside of a cell again. May 1978, a Florida grand jury indicts Ted for first-degree murder and attempted murder and burglary on the attack at the Chi Omega sorority house. The indictments were read publicly, and in response, Ted is extremely indignant, and he implies that he's only indicted because the DA was up for re-election, and he was wholly innocent. They were just pinning all of this on him. He demanded that this be read publicly in front of journalists because he felt like he was being illegally gagged and illegally kept from talking to the press. So while this indictment is read, he sits there quietly, and then he goes on like a 2 minute tirade about him, being held illegally and all this. While awaiting trial, he is kept in a maximum security prison with 3 separate locks on his cell so he can't get out. Now, as part of the trial prep, a warrant is issued for his dental impressions. And this is so they can compare his teeth and his bite impressions to the bite marks that were left on Lisa Levy. He was not interested. He fought this as hard as he could. But he also wasn't told that this was happening right away. They basically put him into a van and said, hey, you're coming with me. We're going for a walk. They drove him to a different location. And as they're coming into the building, he sees a dental chair and a team of dentists, and he now knows what's going on, and he tried to fight his way out of it. He tried to say that there's no way you can have this. I don't consent. You have no proof, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, listen, we're going to get those impressions whether we have to strap you down or not. And realizing he's not going to get out of this, he finally relents. He sits in the chair and he says, I'm not a violent person. Opens his mouth and lets them take the impressions, which is just the funniest shit for somebody who bludgeoned people to death because he was mad he couldn't go and, hurt somebody else right away that evening. Violent person. June 1979, Ted Bundy stands trial for the crimes committed inside the Chi Omega sorority house in Florida Circuit Court in Dade County. Judge Edward Cowart presides, and there's over 250 journalists covering this first nationally televised trial in the U.S. So this was the first trial that was nationally broadcasted on TV. His lawyer, part of his legal team, because he's trying to represent himself again here, but part of his legal team, Mike Minerva, coaches him and basically tells him to say and do as little as possible, just sit quietly and look innocent. He had 5 court-appointed attorneys, but against all good advice, he represents himself, and they just kind of sit there as legal advisors because they have passed the bar and he did not. His legal team would later say that he sabotaged their entire defense effort out of spite, distrust, and grandiose disillusion, even when faced with the death penalty. All he cared about was that he could be in charge. So if he's going to have a sinking ship, he's going to be the captain of it. Not only this, he turns down a gift of a plea deal. Now, this plea deal said that if he pled guilty to the murders of Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, and Kimberly Leach, he would receive a flat 75-year sentence with no death penalty on the table. This was an excellent deal. This was probably the best deal that he was ever going to get because, yeah, you'll spend 75 years in jail, but you get out at the end and maybe you can enjoy a McDonald's cheeseburger at the end of this, right? He initially agrees to this plea deal, but the problem here is that he had to publicly stipulate that he did it. He had to confess in public, like in court, and say that, he did it, why he did it, and, say you're sorry. And he said, I'm willing to do it, but only if there's very few people in the courtroom. Basically, he wanted only the very necessary. The judge, the defense, the prosecution, and the bailiff. That's it. Somebody didn't get that memo, or they deliberately went against it, because the day he walked into that courtroom to accept his plea deal, the entire courtroom was packed with journalists. And just despite everybody, rather than say on camera, I'm guilty and I'm going to take this beautiful gift of a plea deal, he shocks everyone, including his own lawyers, and publicly refuses his plea deal. This is completely bonkers to me. His legal advisors had asked to be removed from his team because he was so uncooperative, but the judge refused to let that happen. They said, deal with it. You're not getting out of this. If I can't get out of this, you're not going to get out of this. He was also looking for a speedy trial. This was nationally televised. He didn't want any more disruption, so he's like, we're doing it. We're getting it done. July 1929. The trial truly begins, and his odds were not good. He constantly went against his advisor's advice. He questioned witnesses himself. He asked for gory details. And this 100% was him reliving his crimes through the witnesses, through his victims. Evidence, including the teeth impressions, were presented. Witnesses and survivors spoke confidently. And the jury was also allowed to hear of his previous conviction in the Carol Durant abduction. So there was everything going against him. And shockingly, a lot of women were still like on his side. And in the words of Bailey Sarian, get better idols, man. Get better idols, because it's wild. I will never understand women who see a guy who's on trial for murdering women and go, oh, that's my baby. I want to be with that man. Y'all are fucking weird. So yeah, a lot of women were fascinated with him. A lot of them were infatuated, and a lot of them made romantic moves. Like they were sending love letters and underwear to him in the mail. Many felt he was too handsome to be guilty. Carol Boone, the woman in the picture here, the brunette with the glasses, she would speak on his behalf as a close personal friend. She was his girlfriend at the time. She advocated for him and fully believed he was innocent. She felt there was no way in hell that this man did all of those murders and all of those assaults. She would be one of his biggest advocates. But it was very clear this trial was not going to go his way, and he could not have that. He tried to avoid going into court by shoving wet toilet paper into the keyholes of his locks on his cell to prevent them from being opened. And he effectively missed court because of this. Excuse me. They would have to dig out all the toilet paper and fix the lock to get him out. The next day, he would be found in contempt of court and was told in no uncertain terms that if he tried to in any way attempt to delay the proceedings further, that he would be found in contempt of court, he would be severely punished, his behavior would not be tolerated. July 24th, 1979, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Ted Bundy guilty of the murders of Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, 3 counts of attempted murder for Kathy Kleiner, Karen Chandler, and Cheryl Thomas, and 2 counts of burglary. It is for these crimes that the judge sentenced him to death, and his mommy begged for mercy. She begged the court for mercy to not kill her baby boy. And what's wild to me also is that the judge apologized to Ted. Like, you're a bright young man, is what he said. I wish things had been different. I have no malice against you, but be well. And that's wild to me. This man, just out of nowhere, in cold blood, murdered these people in such a horrific way, and the judge is like, you're a bright young man. Wish it had been different. Like, what? Ugh, can't even with him. As with all death penalties, Ted would appeal several times, but both his convictions would be upheld, and sentences will be upheld. In 1980, Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, who unfortunately is not actually in this picture. I didn't get a good picture of all 3 of them, but this is a guy who comes later. This is Will Hagmeyer. But Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth, they conduct several interviews over the next couple of years talking about his suspected crimes. He was very hesitant, and he tried to avoid talking about his crimes until presented the option to talk about them in a hypothetical and also attribute them to a third person who he simply named the entity. And these interviews would completely uncover his methods, his rituals, his routines, why he chose certain victims, all under the guise of helping to profile somebody who's definitely not him. He would sit there with the recorder and just kind of hold it and talk into it, completely disregarding anything else around him, once he was given that option to not directly implicate himself. Now, this same year, a murder trial for Kimberly Leach was held, and he would also be found guilty. During this particular case, his one character witness, because remember, he still can't let go of control. He's still representing himself. He called one character witness, and that was Carol Boone. He asked her to marry him during her time to speak, and she agreed. So, boom, immediately married in the court case, because there was like some obscure old ass rule that you could be married that way in the court. So I thought that was interesting. That's what he's spending his time researching, I guess. But yeah, they were married in the courthouse, super romantic, and she still is one of his biggest advocates. Now, during this trial, he's found guilty again. February 10th, 1980, he is sentenced to death again. A lot of people were really skeptical about why they went for the second conviction. And at face value, you're like, he's already in there, why go for another one? they were very much afraid that at some point one of these death sentences would be overturned and he wouldn't actually get the justice he deserved. So they gave two death sentences, hoping that at least one of them would stick through the appeals process. Now, he spent a lot of time in jail trying to get his sentences overturned, but he would eventually exhaust all his appeals. He spent a lot of time on death row getting high on pot with his other cellmates. Carol would visit him often, and they even had a child together. Now, at the time, Florida does not have any rules that allowed for conjugal visits between married couples in jail. So they bribed guards to turn their back while they fucked during these visits, and they produced a child together. October 24th, 1981, Carol gave birth to a daughter whom she named Rose Bundy. And she would bring Rose to the jail to visit with her father. Ted would continue to give interviews with Michaud and Ainsworth and other journalists. His biographers would record over 100 hours of confessions and conversations. He would also speak to Special Agent William Hagmaier. It's the guy in a couple pictures ago. He is from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and was part of a study to basically profile serial killers, to learn how they operated, what their thought process was, their different methods, and the different things that they had in common. And he confirmed everything he owned was likely shoplifted. His biggest motivation for murder was to wholly possess his victims. And he talked a lot about how certain behaviors would kind of come about in his crimes. Through his confessions, he would occasionally admit to a new victim, but would dangle information as a bargaining chip. Always saying, like, I'll give you a name, I'll give you details if I get something out of you. So they knew that there were plenty of victims, but he was just stretching it out, hoping that his, delay in information would help keep him alive. July 1984, prison guards found 2 more hacksaws in his cell and cut bars that he had pasted back on with a homemade adhesive. He was moved to another cell. March 1986, he was supposed to be executed for the sorority attack, but he gets a temporary stay until July of 1986. And during this time between March and July, he begins confessing. April 1986, he confesses to William Hagmaier and his lawyer/biographer, Polly Nelson, a series of murders. He talks about his penchant for decapitation and necrophilia. July 1986, less than 15 hours before his death date, his execution was officially remanded because of legal issues surrounding the Chi Omega case. They upheld him being in prison for it, like there was no question that he did it, but there were some questions as to whether or not it warranted the death penalty. So he was remanded to life in prison for this particular crime. November 1986, his scheduled death sentence was scheduled for the Kimberly Leach case. November of 1986, there was another temporary stay that was issued, but his death sentence would ultimately be upheld in December of 1988. In December, his final execution date would be set for January of 1989, because at this point, all avenues, all appeals have been exhausted. It is time. You can no longer run. Now, ultimately, he would confess to 30 murders between 1973 and 1978. Unfortunately, he was unable to provide a identification, either unwilling or unable, for 11 of these victims. And because of that, I did not include them in my little talk about, the various victims, because if we don't know who they are, we can't really talk about them. I did mention a couple of them in my notes, so if you're on my Patreon, you can go through the notes and find that, a couple of little tidbits that we do know. He also implied that there were many, many, many more murders that he did not confess to, and this also implied that he was active for far longer than just those 5 years. And he was also very selective about how he would talk about the victims. In some cases, he gave lots and lots of detail, and in others, he was very skimpy. And it's either because he didn't know too much about them, or he was holding off on giving information because he felt like maybe he could get more time if he was just parceling out small bits of information. It is likely holding back as an opportunity to try and get a stay. His lawyers urged him not to fuck around, don't drag your feet, tell everybody as much as you can before you die, because we can't help you anymore. There's nowhere for you to go, no more appeals. say what you know, give these families some peace, right? And he's still gambling because he's been shown up to this point that there's always another avenue, there's always another door to walk through. And he still believes at the last second he's going to get a reprieve. He also refused to give details for murders of some of the murders that he thought he was going to look badly in, which any of these murders you look bad in, but specifically children that he couldn't definitively be traced to, or other murders that he thought would look bad. Through the confessions, he breaks down and he breaks his mom's heart and Carol's heart. It does eventually come out that he's making these confessions. He's saying he did it. He said how he did it. He's giving gory details. And as these tapes are being played for his family, they're crushed. And Carol is so disgusted that she believed him and his innocence that she just picks up and moves across the country, changes her name, and drops all contact. And I do not blame her. I did not even attempt to look up where she is now, because this woman deserves a little bit of peace. Like, yeah, she helped him in a few different ways, but we've all been blinded. We've all had a moment of not clarity, you know? So letting her and Rose live their lives without any harassment. The day before his execution, he agrees to a series of last interviews and confessions, and also contemplated suicide because he didn't want to give the state any satisfaction in his death. For hours before his execution, a crowd springs up outside the prison to celebrate. They were basically tailgating and partying back there. You know, they're grilling, they're drinking, they're having a great old time, selling t-shirts, chanting for his death, and apparently Ted was deeply disturbed by this. He felt like these people were the, undignified, animalistic savages that everybody believed he was because they were outside doing that. But I'd be out there with them. Not gonna lie. One of the last things he did was to speak to his mother, who told him, "You'll always be my precious son." Which, on the one hand, I get. Like, you love your kid. You can't stop loving your kid. On the other hand, maybe it's better you let him go, mama. January 24th, 1989, at 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed via electric chair at the Rayford prison in Florida. The assembled crowd outside cheered when they learned that he had finally died. Shortly after that, he was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location over the Cascade Mountains, which is really controversial because that is where he took some of his victims. But they didn't disclose the location because people were afraid that they would desecrate that part of the Cascade Mountains. And they're probably correct. There are probably people who would go out there to do that. Now, there is lots to be said about him. But I want to end this story with the victims. These girls, the 30 that we do know about, whether they are named or not, they range in age from 12 to 26 years old. These are young women and girls who had their entire lives ahead of them. They were bright, beautiful, they had goals, they had dreams, they had ambitions. And Ted took their life simply because he could, because he wanted to. He wanted to possess them. He wanted to own these people. And I think that the best way we can let this continue, this little fucker to continue to rot in hell, is to remember that these women were so much more than their brief time with him. You know, these women are worthy of remembering. So I'm going to make this a little bigger, and you guys can really see their faces. We have a couple of Jane Does. We have Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gale, Susan Rancourt, Kathleen Parks, Brenda Ball. We have Janice Ott, Denise Nasland. I forgot the girl up at the top there. Oh, it's gonna come back to bite me. We have several Jane Does in a row. Nancy Wilcox, Laura Amy. These women, these girls, they're the ones who deserve remembering. And with that, I'm going to tell y'all, stay safe. Do not get in any fucker's car. If somebody tries to drag you into the car, you make all the noise in the goddamn world. You scream, you shout, you kick them right in the balls. Do what you gotta do. Don't end up like these girls who unfortunately ended up in the wrong place. And with that, I will let you know that our next talk is going to be on another sick fuck. We're going to talk about Richard Speck in 2 weeks on March 26th. Same time, same place, effing Chicago, 7 p.m. on March 26th. And with that, I will open the floor to questions, and I want to read all the comments and see what's all going on in here. Yeah, no, I understand where people are really conflicted with the death penalty. I'll tell you one thing, I'm not conflicted at all. I'm really not. If like I'm conflicted with people who get sentenced and they killed like one person. Leave your ass in jail for the rest of your life, for one murder. However, for people where it's definitively proven that you've murdered and raped and you've done so much other shit, and there's no chance of rehabilitation, there's no chance of finding a better purpose in life for you, I got no problems yeeting you off this mortal coil. It's one of those cases where I'm like very okay with the death penalty in that case. Well, I'm glad that I've inspired you guys to do some research. I love these talks for that reason. I love being able to like go in and find new topics to enjoy. Also, if you guys have other topics you want to see, throw them down in the comments because I'm always happy to add things to my list. Do we have any questions? Thank you all. I'm glad you guys enjoyed this. No, you everybody needs to know that like if there's nothing else you can do, if all you can do is scream, fucking scream, be loud, make a scene, because people, even if you end up getting like sent somewhere else, if you end up getting dragged somewhere else, if you make noise and you make a scene, people are going to remember you, and they're going to remember who took you. Who provided bail? Mommy and Daddy. Mommy and Daddy provided bail for him. The Unabomber. Didn't you have somebody who was connected to the Unabomber, babe?
Yeah, one of the guys used the game with.
Yeah, one of his old D&D buddies.
Lives in Milwaukee.
Yeah, one of his old D&D buddies was
the nephew.
The nephew of the Unabomber. It's a small world. I'll add the Unabomber to the list. Any other questions? All right. Well, now that we are at the end, I do want to remind you all that if you guys like this kind of content, you want to see more of it, hit me up on Venmo, Patreon, PayPal. Buy me a cup of coffee, help me keep the lights on, help me buy fancy treats for my cat. He loves a good fancy treat. Also, come back in a couple weeks when we talk about Richard Speck, March 22nd at 7 p.m. And until then, hope you guys have a great rest of your night, a great rest of your week, and I will see you all on the next video. Bye, guys.